It ended on a Tuesday, a perfectly normal, gray Tuesday in a quiet suburb outside of Boston. The air was thick with the promise of rain, and I remember the smell of damp earth and old money that always seemed to cling to Julian's car. He didn't come inside. He just stood on my doorstep, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his tailored peacoat, his jaw so tight I could see the muscles twitching from 10 feet away. "I don't think this is viable, Clara," he said. His voice was hollow, stripped of the warmth I had spent the last 14 months memorizing. It was the voice of a stranger reading a press release. "Viable?" I laughed, a sharp, ugly sound that startled a bird from the oak tree in my yard. "Julian, what are you talking about? We're not a business merger. I made reservations at Tavola for your birthday on Friday. What's not viable?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. Instead, he stared at a spot just over my shoulder, as if my ghost were standing behind me. "Your emotional responses have become unpredictable. Your stability is a concern. For the family." My blood ran cold. The family, the Ashworths. It always came back to them. I felt a familiar, sickening churn in my stomach, the one that had become my constant companion over the last few months. It was the feeling of walking on a floor that you suddenly realize is made of glass, suspended over a great, dark height. "My stability?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Julian, your mother moved my grandfather's watch last weekend, and then spent the entire brunch telling everyone I was becoming forgetful. Your sister accidentally spilled a glass of red wine on the designs for the Miller project, and then told you I flew into a hysterical rage. I was upset, yes, but hysterical? You know that's not true." He finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes broke me more than the words ever could. It was pity. A deep, sorrowful pity. The kind you give to a wounded animal you know you can't save. "I know you've been under a lot of stress," he said, his voice softening, which was somehow worse. "And maybe this is for the best. It gives you time to work on yourself, find your equilibrium again." He was gaslighting me. He was gaslighting me. Standing on my own front porch, under the sky that was about to break, he was calmly and lovingly telling me that I was crazy. He was using my own reactions to their calculated cruelty as proof of my instability. My reality, the one where I was being systematically dismantled by his family, was being erased and replaced with his. And he believed it. That was the most terrifying part. He genuinely, truly believed it. "And so this is it? And so this is it?" I asked, the fight draining out of me, replaced by a profound Arctic cold. 14 months, and you're breaking up with me on my porch because your mother says I'm unstable?" "It's not just my mother," he said, his gaze flicking away again. "It's a collective assessment. We all want what's best for you, Clara, and for the family." He took a half step back, a retreat. "I'm sorry." He turned and walked back to his gleaming black Audi, the car his father had given him for graduating law school. He didn't look back. I stood there until the rain finally started, fat, cold drops that plastered my hair to my face and mingled with the silent tears streaming down my cheeks. He hadn't just broken my heart. He had taken my sanity, wrapped it up in a neat little box, and handed it back to me, telling me it was broken. And for a little while, standing in that cold rain, I almost believed him. To understand how I got there, on that porch, you have to understand Julian. Or at least the Julian I first met. We were introduced by a mutual friend at a charity gala for the Boston Public Library. I was a junior architect at a firm that was just starting to get noticed, and I was there to network. He was Julian Ashworth, a name that carried weight in the city. Old money, real estate, philanthropy. He was impossibly handsome in that classic New England way, with dark hair, serious blue eyes, and a smile that could disarm armies. He wasn't arrogant, though. He was witty and self-deprecating, and he listened, really listened, when I talked about my passion for sustainable urban design. He asked intelligent questions. He remembered the name of my dog. By the end of the night, he had my number, and I had a feeling in my chest like a hummingbird had taken up residence. Our first few months were a blur of cinematic romance. Picnics on the Charles River Esplanade, weekends in a borrowed cabin in the Berkshires, late-night conversations over wine where we mapped out our futures. He was my biggest cheerleader, a rock of support when my firm was going through a tough merger. He'd show up at my apartment after a 14-hour workday with takeout from my favorite Thai place and a bottle of Sancerre, and just hold me while I vented. He made me feel seen, cherished, and safe. The first time I met the Ashworths, I was nervous, but Julian had assured me it would be fine. "They're a little formal," he'd warned, "but they're going to love you." Their home in Concord was less a house and more a compound. A sprawling colonial masterpiece of white clapboards and dark green shutters, set on acres of manicured lawn that rolled down to a private pond. It was beautiful, but in a sterile, intimidating way, like a museum you weren't allowed to touch. His mother, Eleanor, was the curator, a tall, elegant woman in her late 50s, with Julian's blue eyes and a smile that never quite reached them. She greeted me with a handshake that was cool and dry. His father, Robert, was a quiet, distinguished man who seemed to exist in his wife's shadow, offering a polite nod before retreating to his study. And then there was Chloe, Julian's younger sister. She was a perfect porcelain doll replica of her mother, all sharp angles and polite, assessing glances. The afternoon was a master class in subtle interrogation. Every question was couched in pleasantry, but they were all tests. "Clara, Julian tells us you're an architect," Eleanor began, passing me a delicate teacup. "How fascinating. Do you find it difficult, competing in such a male-dominated field?" "I enjoy the challenge," I said with a smile. "I think my work speaks for itself," Sin murmured, taking a slow sip of her tea. "Confidence is so important, as long as it doesn't stray into assertiveness. That can be so off-putting in a woman, don't you think?" It was the first little cut. I felt it, a tiny sting, but I brushed it off as a generational difference. An old-fashioned view. But the cuts kept coming. Chloe asked about my family. When I explained that my parents were retired teachers living a quiet life in Arizona, her smile tightened. "Oh, that's sweet," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "It must be so different for you then. Being around all of this?" She gestured vaguely at the cavernous living room with its antique furniture and oil paintings of dead Ashworths. Julian, bless his heart, seemed oblivious. He'd squeeze my hand under the table, beaming with pride, blind to the psychological scalpels his mother and sister were wielding. He'd been conditioned his whole life. This was just normal family conversation to him. For me, it was like trying to breathe underwater. I left that day with a splitting headache and a deep sense of unease. That was the beginning of what I now call the gaslighting gauntlet. It was never overt. It was always deniable. My car keys would go missing from the bowl by their front door, only for Eleanor to find them an hour later in a completely different room, sighing, "Oh, Clara dear, you must be so tired. You're getting a bit scattered." Once I brought a bottle of expensive scotch for Robert, his favorite. A week later, Julian called me, confused. "My mom said you brought them a bottle of Chardonnay?" She said. It was a sweet gesture. "But you know Dad doesn't drink white wine." When I insisted I had brought scotch, Julian just sounded tired. "Okay, Clara, it doesn't matter. It was a nice thought either way. But it did matter. It was a slow, deliberate campaign to paint me as unstable, forgetful, inadequate. They were chipping away at my confidence, my sense of self, piece by piece. And Julian was their unwitting accomplice. His love for me was real, I knew it was. But his loyalty to his family was a primal, deep-rooted thing, a part of his DNA. He was caught in the middle, and his brain performed the most incredible gymnastics to hold two contradictory ideas at once. That I was the wonderful woman he loved, and that his family's assessment of me as flawed and erratic was also correct. This cognitive dissonance was making him miserable, and instead of questioning his family, it was easier to question me. The final straw, the incident that led to the breakup on my porch, happened at their annual garden party. It was a huge affair, with half of Boston's elite wandering the grounds. Eleanor had asked me to wear a specific family heirloom, a sapphire pendant that had belonged to Julian's great-grandmother. "It means you're truly one of us now," she'd said, clasping it around my neck. I felt a surge of hope. Maybe I had finally passed their tests. An hour into the party, Chloe came up to me, her face a mask of panic. Clara. The clasp on the pendant. It's come undone." I looked down. The necklace was gone. Panic seized me. We searched the lawn, the patio, everywhere. It was nowhere. Eleanor glided over, her face a carefully constructed tableau of disappointment. "Oh dear," she said, loud enough for the people around us to hear. "Such a careless thing to do." I was mortified. I swore I had felt the clasp secure. I knew I had. But here was the evidence. The necklace was gone, and I was the one who had been wearing it. Julian looked at me, his face a storm of conflict and embarrassment. He wanted to defend me, but how could he? The facts were against me. Later that evening, after the guests had left, Chloe found the necklace in a potted plant on the far side of the terrace, a place I hadn't been near all day. The clasp was perfectly intact. The implication was clear. I had taken it off and hidden it, either out of malice or sheer, flighty incompetence. I tried to explain to Julian. This was a setup, Julian. I swear it was. Chloe, your mother. They're trying to make me look bad. He just looked exhausted. Clara, listen to yourself. Why would they do that? My sister found the necklace. She saved the day. You're spinning theories. You're seeing conspiracies everywhere. Maybe my mother is right. Maybe you are under too much pressure. That was 2 days before he showed up on my porch. He had made his choice. He chose the carefully constructed reality his family had built over the messy, complicated truth of my love. He chose the institution over the individual. I had failed their final, most brutal test. For 2 weeks after the breakup, I was a ghost. I moved through my life on autopilot. I went to work, I fed my dog, I stared at the ceiling of my apartment for hours. I replayed every moment, every conversation, every little cut. Had I imagined it all? Was I really the unstable, paranoid person they painted me to be? Their poison had worked. I was questioning everything, especially myself. The foundation of my own mind felt like it was crumbling. I was trapped in a cycle of self-blame and confusion, exactly where they wanted me. But then, one night, fueled by a bottle of wine and a deep, simmering rage that was finally starting to burn through the fog of my grief, I had a thought. I wasn't the first. Julian was 32. He was handsome, successful, and came from a dynasty. There was no way I was the first serious girlfriend he'd brought home. My fingers trembled as I typed his name into a deep dive on social media, looking at tagged photos from years ago. It took me 2 hours, but I found her. A woman named Sarah Jensen. They had dated for almost 2 years about 5 years ago. There were pictures of them looking happy, in love, and then, suddenly, nothing. She had vanished from his digital life completely. I found her profile. She was a landscape designer now, living in Oregon. She looked happy, peaceful. I hesitated for a whole day, my cursor hovering over the message button. What would I even say? Hi, you don't know me, but our ex-boyfriend's family psychologically tortured me. Did they do it to you too? It sounded insane, but I had to know. I had to know if I was crazy. I took a deep breath and wrote the message. Hi Sarah, my name is Clara. This is going to sound incredibly strange, but I recently dated Julian Ashworth. I know you were with him a few years ago. I'm going through a difficult time and I have a feeling you might be the only person on earth who understands why. If you're willing to talk, it would mean the world to me. I hit send and felt a jolt, as if I'd just touched a live wire. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't just reacting. I was acting. It was a small step, but it was a step out of the fog. I had no idea that I had just lit a fuse, and that the explosion would be more spectacular than I could ever have imagined. Sarah replied within the hour. Her message was short, but it sent a tremor through me. Clara, I'm so sorry. I know exactly why you're writing. Are you free to talk tomorrow? My treat. I think I owe you a long conversation. The relief was so immense, so overwhelming that I started to sob. It wasn't a sad cry. It was the gut-wrenching, air-gulping cry of a prisoner who has just seen sunlight for the first time in years. I wasn't crazy. It was real. The next day, we spoke on the phone for 3 hours. Her voice was calm and steady, the voice of a survivor. And she laid it all out. The charming introduction, the perfect romance. And then, the slow, methodical descent into the Ashworths' special brand of hell. They call it The Reckoning, Sarah said, and the name itself was so melodramatic, so self-important, that I almost laughed. It's the most horrifying family tradition you can imagine. It's Eleanor's masterpiece. She believes the Ashworth family is a fortress, and any new person who wants to marry in must be tested to see if they're strong enough. But her definition of strong is someone she can completely dominate. The Reckoning is designed to break you down, to erode your confidence, to isolate you from your own intuition until you're completely dependent on their approval. She told me her stories. A beloved family recipe she'd cooked for them, only for Chloe to add a cup of salt to it when she wasn't looking, making everyone recoil in disgust. Eleanor losing Tickets to a concert Sarah had bought for her and Julian's anniversary, then blaming Sarah's disorganization. The constant whispered comments about her middle-class background, her ambitious career, her sensitive nature. My final test, Sarah said, her voice dropping, was an accusation of infidelity. They hired a private investigator. They took a photo of me having lunch with a male colleague and doctored it to look intimate. They presented it to Julian as incontrovertible proof. He didn't even ask me, he just ended it. He told me he couldn't have someone with such moral failings in his life. I had a nervous breakdown, Clara. I had to move across the country to put myself back together. It took me years to trust my own judgment again. Every word she said was a key, unlocking a memory, putting a name to the formless dread I had been living with. The misplaced watch. The spilled wine. The missing necklace. They weren't accidents or misunderstandings. They were moves in a sick, calculated game. They were playing with people's lives for sport, under the guise of family tradition. Why? I asked, my voice hoarse. Why does Julian go along with it? Learned helplessness, Sarah said simply. He's been indoctrinated since birth. To him, Eleanor is the sun. Her approval is warmth and life. Her disapproval is a freezing death. He can't conceive of a world where she might be wrong, let alone cruel. His brain won't let him. It's easier to believe we're flawed than to believe his entire world is built on a foundation of lies and psychological abuse. He's as much a victim as we are, in a way. After the call, I felt a new emotion rising in me, eclipsing the grief and the confusion. It was rage, a cold, clear architectural rage. They had built a structure of lies, and I was going to dismantle it, brick by brick. My petty revenge wasn't going to be about getting Julian back or making Chloe cry. It was going to be about justice. It was going to be about burning their fortress to the ground so they could never trap anyone else inside it again. And just like clockwork, 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Julian. He sounded wrecked. His voice was thick with guilt and sleepless nights. "Clara," he croaked. "I made a terrible mistake." The cognitive dissonance had finally shattered him. The silence from me, my complete disappearance from his life, had been the one thing his mother couldn't explain away. He'd been forced to sit with his own actions, and he couldn't live with them. "She told me," he confessed, his words tumbling out in a rush. "My mother, she told me everything, about the necklace. She admitted she had Chloe take it. She called it a final character assessment. She was proud of it. She thought I'd be relieved that you failed." He was sobbing now. "It's this thing they do, Clara, this tradition, the reckoning. It's sick, it's twisted. I didn't see it. I swear I didn't see it for what it was until you were gone. I've been a blind, spineless coward. Please just give me another chance. I'll do anything. We can leave. We can move away. We'll never have to see them again." The old Clara would have melted. The old Clara would have heard the pain in his voice and rushed to soothe it. But the old Clara was gone. The Ashworths had killed her. In her place was a woman with a blueprint for revenge and a core of solid steel. "Anything, Julian? Julian?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "Yes, anything, I swear." "Okay," I said. "Okay," I said. Here is what you are going to do." My plan had 3 phases. Phase 1, the confession. I had Julian write down everything. Every test he was aware of, every manipulation, every lie his mother and sister had told him about me. And after a little probing, about Sarah. He had to detail the entire concept of the reckoning, its purpose, and its history. He cried the whole time he wrote it, but he did it. He owed me that much. He signed it, and I had it notarized. Phase 2, the alliance. I reached out to Sarah again, armed with Julian's confession. I asked if she would be willing to write her own account. Seeing Julian's words, his admission of what was done to her, was a catharsis for her. She agreed immediately. Then I did more digging. I found 2 other ex-girlfriends who had been put through the gauntlet. One was a painter in New York, the other a doctor in Chicago. They had been dismissed as so flighty and too career-obsessed. Their stories were chillingly similar. With Julian's confession as proof, they both agreed to write sworn affidavits about their experiences. I now had a dossier, a testament to years of systematic abuse. Phase 3, the performance. This was the masterstroke. I told Julian I would consider taking him back, but on one condition. He had to arrange a dinner, a formal dinner at the Ashworth estate. He had to tell his mother it was a reconciliation dinner, that I had seen the error of my ways and was ready to apologize and formally ask for their blessing to re-enter Julian's life. Eleanor, drunk on her own victory, was ecstatic. She couldn't resist the opportunity to see me grovel. And to make her triumph even sweeter, she insisted on inviting a dozen of their closest friends and business associates, the pillars of Boston society. She wanted an audience for my humiliation. She was about to get a performance, all right. Just not the one she was expecting. The night of the dinner, I walked into that house feeling no fear. I was dressed in a simple, elegant black dress. I looked demure, broken. Chloe smirked at me from across the foyer. Eleanor greeted me with a triumphant, patronizing smile. "Clara, dear, I'm so glad you've come to your senses."
Dinner was an agonizing spectacle of self-congratulation.
Robert Ashworth gave a toast to family unity and sound judgment. Eleanor's friends shot me pitying looks. I played my part, keeping my eyes downcast, speaking only when spoken to, a perfect portrait of a chastened woman. Julian sat beside me, pale and silent, his hands trembling in his lap. Finally, after the dessert plates were cleared, Eleanor turned to me, her voice ringing with authority. "Well, Clara, we understand you have something to say to us." The room went silent. All eyes were on me. This was it. The moment of my surrender. I stood up slowly, clutching a small leather-bound portfolio. I took a deep breath. "Yes, I do," I said, my voice clear and strong, resonating in the suddenly still room. "I do have something to say, but it's not an apology." I looked directly at Eleanor. Her smile faltered. "For generations," I began, my voice like ice. "The Ashworth family has prided itself on a tradition. A secret, horrifying tradition known as the Reckoning. It's a campaign of psychological warfare waged against any woman who has the misfortune of loving your son. A series of sadistic tests designed to break her spirit and remake her in your image." A collective gasp went through the room. Eleanor's face went white. "This is absurd. She's hysterical." "Am I?" I asked, opening the portfolio. "Then perhaps you can explain this." I took out the first document. "This is a notarized confession, signed by your son, Julian Ashworth." I looked at him. He wouldn't meet my gaze. "In it, he details the deliberate and malicious acts perpetrated by you and your daughter, Chloe, against me, including the theft and planting of a family heirloom to frame me as careless and unstable." See, I placed the confession on the table. Then I took out the next document. This is a sworn affidavit from Sarah Jensen, a landscape designer in Oregon. She was also a victim of the Reckoning. And in it, she details how you hired a private investigator to fabricate evidence of infidelity to destroy her reputation and her relationship with Julian. Eli placed her statement next to Julian's. "And this," I said, pulling out two more, "is testimony from Dr. Alicia Rye of Chicago and Ms. Isabel Dubois of New York, both subjected to the same pattern of gaslighting, manipulation, and abuse." I let the pages flutter onto the table. They lay there, a pile of evidence, irrefutable and damning. The guests were staring, mouths agape, looking from me to the pale, horrified face of Eleanor Ashworth. "And you don't test for strength," I said, my voice rising with every word of truth I had held back. "You test for submission. You don't build a family, you command a cult. You are not a matriarch. Oh, you are a tyrant who preys on the emotional well-being of others for your own sick sport. And you," I said, turning to the stunned guests, "have been propping up this facade of gentility in class for years, blind to the rot at its core." I looked at Julian one last time. His face was a mask of agony. He was finally free, but his world was in ashes around him. "Ace for you, Julian," I said, my voice softening just a fraction. "I do pity you. But I cannot save you. You have to do that yourself." And with that, I turned my back on all of them. On the whispers, on Eleanor's strangled cry, on Chloe's look of pure hatred. I walked out of that house, out of that life, and didn't look back. And I could hear the shouting start before the heavy oak door even clicked shut behind me. The fortress had been breached. Its walls were tumbling down. It's been a year. I heard the Ashworth name is mud in Boston. Their reputation is shattered. Several of the guests at that dinner were journalists or married to them. The story, in a sanitized version, made the society pages. Julian did move away. He's in therapy, Sarah told me. I hope he finds peace. As for me, I'm thriving. And my firm just won a major contract to design a new community art center. I'm building things that are beautiful and functional and honest. I'm building a life on my own terms, on a foundation of my own making. They tried to break me, to convince me that my mind was a flawed and unreliable thing. But in the end, my mind was the one thing that saved me, and it built me a future they could never touch.